Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Welcome to another episode of the show. My name is Alicia Thomas. All too often, couples who are looking to marry leap into the false conception that love is enough to lead them into a successful relationship. Because of that misconception, the lesson often learned is that love, as Tina Turner would say it, is just a secondhand emotion. To better prepare for marriage, whether entering into a blended family or traditional union, counselors are used as a resource to help couples with conflict resolution and aid in disabling potential relationship landmines. With me today is Andrea Riley, a marriage service technician who works to help couples and individuals alike be proactive in their relationships, staying clear of volatile situations. Andrea, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So many times we often interchange the meaning of a marriage counselor and a marriage service technician. Can you tell us the difference between the two?
Well, first, I'd just like to say that we are certified to do marriage counseling. However, a marriage service technician does a lot of teaching, training, more proactive measures that can steer couples in the right direction prior to marriage, in the beginning stages of marriage, before problems develop or when they see that things are small and still manageable. It's not as though you have to wait until you're out of control and headed to the divorce court or about to separate or just feel like you're at your wit's end to come to us. We're able to help guide and also mentor people through the process and hopefully keep people from having to go to counseling.
Okay, great. That's great. Now, as a technician, it seems that your services are imperative, especially to families who may not fit into the traditional mold, but rather families who are coming together as a blended one, meaning one or both partners come into the union with children from a previous relationship. Do you feel that it's necessary for couples who are looking to blend their families seek counseling?
I think it's absolutely imperative that they do so. We went to counseling, traditional counseling. We actually had 4 different sources. Pastors, people that were in ministry, and then another couple who had been married for quite a long time. So we went to 4 different sources before we got married. When we got married, Cliff already had 2 children. So we got a lot of good advice. We wrote everything down. We took everything very seriously. But there was absolutely not one iota of information that we received prior to getting married that prepared us to help blend our family. And some of the advice that you might get or some of the various teaching and conferences that we've been to, even in our early years of marriage, as much as we've listened to radio broadcasts, all types of things, and gathered all types of information to help us solve some of our problems. But until just a few years ago, we had not received one piece of information that really dealt with how do you bring things together when children precede the marital bond. And that makes a big difference. See, in what we call a quote-unquote traditional marriage, if you have a husband and wife that come together and they form a union and a bond, and they don't have children prior to marriage, then when the children come along, they know that the marriage predates their existence. So that marital bond was there before the parent-child bond came along. So this is really important because children see it as beneficial for their parents to stay together. I've talked to people in their 50s and their parents have been divorced and they still wish that their parents were back together. So people who are grandparents actually kind of in the back of their minds always wonder what it could have been like or what it could have been, or how their lives would have been different, or perhaps their parents might get back together. So children are actually rooting for the marriage. So when problems arise, if there's arguments, the children want to see that resolved. And not that they have any control over it, but they don't see the marital bond as a threat. They see it as part of their security. They can see it as a plus. Now, on the other hand, when you have children, a parent and child bond that precedes the marriage, and generally when a blended family is formed, it's formed after some type of loss. So that loss could have been a divorce. It could have been a death of a spouse or a parent. It could have been through maybe the parents never were married, but the relationship broke up. But there is some type of loss there. So the parent and the child, for whatever period of time, whether it's months, whether it's years, they've bonded together, and they've even bonded around that loss. So that bond is really strong. And then when the marriage comes together, now they're forming another union and they're forming a bond. But now the parent-child bond actually predates the marital bond. So while this new couple is trying to bond, they have another bond they could be pulling against it. And oftentimes, rather than the child seeing the new marriage or the new spouse or new step-parent as a plus, they can see that as a threat. And then sometimes knowingly or unknowingly can actually do things to work against the marriage. So that's a big difference, and there's a lot that goes into it, that if people aren't aware of it or aren't paying attention to it or just don't know how impactful it can be, they can really be setting themselves up for failure or for a lot of frustration.
Okay. All right. That really makes a lot of sense. And it really seems as though your focus is also on helping transition not only the couples, but also the children as well. So the entire union is harmonious.
That's absolutely correct. And it is very important. One of the things that we have found, just to give you an illustration from our own lives, as I said, Chris already had 2 children, a son and a daughter, prior to us getting married. And then we have 2 children together. And I can tell you there's a tremendous difference. And one of them is our children that we have together really cannot pit one of us against the other. Even if they wanted to, they just don't have the ability to do it. And one thing that I can tell you is that no matter what happens in our home with the 2 children who still live here, there's never a time when Cliff has to wonder if I love his children. Now, based on our history, because we've now been married over 24 years, he knows that I love Nishay and Brian, which are my stepchildren. My older son and daughter, he knows that I love them very much. But there were times in the earlier stages when conflict would arise, or I would bring up things that were going on and point out different things. What would happen, he actually would get defensive. And he sometimes would feel like he needed to protect his children from me because maybe I'm pointing out whatever it is that I'm noticing as a mother, things that I'm noticing that are going on, or things that should be going on that aren't, such as homework. So there is room within that blended union, especially if people don't really understand the dynamics behind it. There's room for things to appear like, this is the evil stepmother, and she's just picking on me because she doesn't like me, or so on and so forth. Where the same exact situation could happen with a child and a natural parent, and there's never ever any question. There's never any question. Even if one of my natural children did say I didn't love them, who would ever pay attention to it? But in a blended family, that's another scenario. Again, because you have that strong bond that's already there, and the parents sometimes can feel like they need to protect the child against the other parent, or in our case, there was a lot of guilt. For various reasons, there was a lot of guilt that Cliff was carrying, and he wasn't aware of it. So if I would point out something that was going on with one of the children, he would take it as a threat to him or to his parenting skills or to something that he hadn't done or some deficiency or just he would take it as a personal attack. And it wasn't an attack on anyone. It was pointing out things so that we could find solutions and problems and deal with matters, not to point a finger or to hurt anyone. But we later discussed it, and I've learned that sometimes it would feel like there were daggers that I was throwing at him. If I would say, well, did you know this and that and the other happened? Or did you notice this, that, and the other? That's what would happen. And again, when you have the two biological parents that are having these interactions, the love or loyalty or whatever that might be, it never comes to question. It's just, okay, well, let's just deal with these problems. Let's just deal with these issues. Let's come up with some solution, or how are we going to deal out consequences, or how are we going to prevent them? But it's never a matter of you're picking on my child or you just don't understand them. Because who could tell? You could never tell me I don't understand my natural children. But that's often the thing that comes up in blended families.
Now, you mentioned your stepchildren by name, but you also mentioned them not as stepchildren, but as your son and your daughter. Now, how important is using that neutral language when helping couples become one?
Well, I'm going to say it like this. I think it's important, but one of the things that we try to help couples understand is that we kind of look at it on a case-by-case basis. Because oftentimes, and this was our case for sure, people get married, they meet somebody, they fall in love, and they want to form this new family, and they're all excited. And oftentimes they don't give the children that chance to make those adjustments. And as much as people might have good intentions and are very well-meaning, what often happens is that they rush the children into something that they're really not ready for. And later to find out, you really cannot rush them. When they're ready to open up and to accept that step parent, that's when they're going to be ready. There are things that you can do to help them, and those are some of the things that, we deal with, or we point out things that might be working against that if we see them. But we really can't force a child to accept, even if we make them call them a particular name, a lot of times that can just work against us and build up resentment. And on the other hand, as the step parent, an outsider coming into the family, I can say that I embraced the children. I didn't have a problem with them in whatsoever. Actually, I loved them. I knew them actually before I knew my husband. However, sometimes we can put expectations because we want everything just to come together, and we just want it to be just like the couple next door who, they've been knowing the child since they were in the womb, and you expect someone else to come in from the outside and have the same response and the same affection towards that child or those children as someone who's been knowing them since they were in the womb. And ideally, that's what we want to get to, where we would just say, this is my son, this is my daughter. But even if we say it with words, getting to the place where it's actually coming from our hearts is a different matter. So even though I accepted both of my children, I accepted them as my children from day one, we did not have that relationship. So it's not, I think it's important to use the language, and that's part of it. But the other part is forming that bond, and that with that language is actually matching what's going on in the relationship and what's going on in the heart. And that can be a process. So it can start with the language, but that's not the end all be all. And I would also like to point out, because sometimes people say, well, I don't call my children, I don't call them stepchildren. I just call them children. I've heard it over and over again. And I do the same. And the only reason I really refer to them as my stepchildren is because we deal with marriages a lot. And sometimes I need to be able to distinguish when I'm explaining something. I need to be able to distinguish which is which and who I'm referring to so that people can understand the context behind what it is I'm saying. But just in general conversation, if I'm not doing a radio interview or in front of a class or a group of people where I'm specifically talking about marriage and relationships and family, then they're my children. But and even for them, they call me their mom generally, but then sometimes they have to distinguish it because of something that they're saying. So just a word to point that out. But it's not so much the language. That's the beginning point. But there's a whole lot more that goes behind that, where people feel that bond that this is my son or my daughter, and this is my mother or my father, versus stepson, stepdaughter, stepmom, stepdad.
Okay. Now, Andrea, earlier you spoke of an incident between you and your husband when initially working together to raise your stepchildren. Now, I imagine you see the situation a lot. My first question to you is, what are the typical couples you see? And my second question to you is, do you provide services for individuals alike?
Okay, to answer your first question, there is no typical couple. And the reason why I say that, one of the things that we've learned and we teach other couples is that there are actually 67 different combinations, possible combinations of step families or blended families. And because somebody actually did the math on this. So it's not even like a number somebody just pulled out of a hat. Somebody actually sat down and considered all the different combinations. You can have people who have been either widowed, people who have been divorced, people who have never been married. You can have children on one side, or both spouses can have children. So there's all kinds of combinations with that. So I said all that to say that there isn't a typical couple. They come in all ages. Some of them have already raised their children, and now they're marrying someone that has younger children that they're having to help raise. I cannot tell you one typical family, but I can say one thing that I do find in common that is typical is that people have had no training, they've never heard of teaching, they've never been given any practical advice on things to do to make their family harmonious. So that I can say is typical.
And as far as individuals, can individuals come and seek your counseling services as well?
Oh, yeah. We've had individuals who have come to various trainings and teachings in small groups that we've had. They were people twofold. You have the people who are single and they have children, so they know at some point they desire to get married or either they're engaged. So they know, okay, I understand I already have a child or children. So I'm understanding that it's going to be the transition when I get remarried or get married for the first time. So you have that type of person. And then you have the person who's an individual and does not have children, but is considering marrying someone or seriously dating someone who does have children, and they want to really understand what it is they're they could be potentially getting themselves into, or how to handle situations, or sometimes they already see scenarios arising even in the dating stage, and they want to get some wisdom.
Okay. Now, I have a question because this is something that I think a lot of people think of when they are initially struck with Cupid's arrow. And it's that when couples initially meet, they kind of have that stuck in love period. And I really think that they lack the knowledge and even the foundation to really foresee that marriage is a lot more than just this mystical, everlasting love concept. What is the advice you would give to those couples who absolutely feel that love is all you need for a successful and long lasting relationship?
Well, the first thing I would say is very practical. They need to look around at someone who they think has that ideal, lasting, mystical, whatever they have, whatever they're experiencing. Look around, find a couple, if you can, who actually has that, that's been married for some time, been married for, 10 years or more. The longer, the better. And ask, was that enough? Do you think that's enough? We're really in love. Just ask. I think they'd be hard pressed to find someone who's had any time. Maybe they might find another newlywed, someone been married for a few months that might say, yes, that's enough. But anyone that has any time under their belt, I'm pretty sure would tell them that that's a fallacy. So that would be my first piece of advice. Just look around. And in our case, we didn't even have anybody. We looked around. We didn't have anybody who we felt like, oh, that's the marriage we would love to have. Oh, they are ideal. So when we were having problems, we didn't have anybody that we really thought, oh, well, I know they have the answer. And how do they maintain that mystical relationship? We didn't really see it. So that would be my first piece of advice, because that's kind of like a reality check. That's not really the way life is. And then the second thing I would say is, there's a proverb that says, in a multitude of counselors, there's safety. So even if that were the case, if love was enough, why not ask someone? Why not get some advice to make sure? Because when we're in the days and times when divorce rates are at least 50%, then how do you not fall into that category when they know? Most of us know people who have been to weddings, or people who have were really, really, this is mystical in the beginning, but then they didn't make it. So how do we not fall into that category? So even if that were the case, if it is going to be mystical, then why not just get advice how to maintain what that is that you are experiencing? And I think once that couple goes and sits down, and they'll be able to get a better perspective if they sit down with someone like us, or someone that does have that type of wisdom, then I think that'll help them a lot. So even if you think that's going to be enough, well, just double check with someone to find out how to maintain it.
Okay. Now, you spoke of classes that you teach, and of course, your counseling service, which, by the way, is a service that you and your husband provide together. This is your business together. But what are some other things that you have going on in the works?
Well, we have some workshops coming up. We're going to be doing a lot more work with blended families. We don't have the date set yet, but that's going to be our focus, because, again, what we're finding is that there's a plethora of resources out here, books, podcasts, just all types of materials out here for marriage in general. But this more specific area of blended families, we don't see a lot of, and it's so needed. we really find that the problems that they face and the intricacies of the relationship, besides the ones I just named, even things such as children living in multiple homes, um, trying to set up structure with your child, but the structure in the other home is different rules, different values, conflict with ex-spouses or the other biological parents. There's even financial issues that can be different, whether it's things going on with child support that is going outside the home to help support children that don't live with you, or having children living with you and dealing with custody and child support, visitation, holidays, which is a big one. Just all those types of things that if you have just the biological parents and the children are living in the same home, things that they never have to deal with. So that doesn't always get discussed. So we are working on a book, and we are also setting up some workshops and some seminars, dates to be announced soon, for the focus primarily on blended families.
Okay, great. Now, Andrea, for those who would like to know more about your services and even to get in touch with you, especially for those blended couples and for couples who are entering into that quote unquote traditional union, what are some ways that they can get in contact with you?
Well, you can reach us on our website. It's marriageservicetechnicians.com, or you can reach us at 609-326-3329.
Can you give us that number one more time?
Sure, 609-326-3329, or marriageservicetechnicians.com.
Andrea, thank you so much for joining us now. And wrapping up, is there anything else that you'd like to mention?
I just like to mention that the old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I really would just like to encourage couples to seek help and seek counsel and wisdom from people who have successful marriages, whether it's from us or someone else around you that has the experience and already has some time under their belt. Don't be afraid or ashamed to feel like, well, we're in love and we spent all this money on the wedding and now we're having problems and we don't want people to know. That's foolishness, because anybody that has any time under their belt, they will have had problems as well, and they will have gone through those same things. I just encourage couples just not to wait until you're on your way to a divorce court or on your way to separate before you deal with your problems. Just whether you come to us, go to somebody. It's so much at stake, particularly for the blended families. The children have already suffered some type of loss prior to the blended family forming. So you don't want to be in a position, if you can help it, to just add more pain and more insult to injury to what the children have already faced. There is a study that shows that it takes a while for blended families, the stress level, to reach the levels equal with traditional marriages. It can take a few years, but working through it is going to be really worth it. And there's a study that showed that children who've been affected by a divorce, they're more likely to be divorced. But there's a study that showed that blended families, once that divorced couple got remarried, if they stayed the course and got to the point where their home was stable, then they actually can reverse the effects, the negative effects that children had already faced. And their likelihood of being divorced actually gets diminished. So I just like to say, get the help. Don't be too proud or don't be too ashamed to ask for help, because The truth be told, we all need it, whether we ask for it or not. Oh, that's what I'd like to leave everyone with.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. I know that the knowledge that you imparted on us today will go a long way for so many listeners. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.